Welcome, everyone. We'll be waiting 2 to 3 minutes to get started for people who are still in the middle of connecting. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being part of our community. We have an interesting topic to cover today, but first, a few reminders. Please feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the IM window. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. We've had a large number of people register for this webinar, and we're thrilled to see such interest, but it means it may be impossible for us to respond to all of the questions in real time. We will do our best, and we have several dedicated people standing by just to answer questions, but I wanted to provide an additional mechanism to ensure everyone's questions get answered. If you'll visit aka.ms/AIPQ&A, you'll see a post dedicated to webinar questions. We'll be reviewing the question transcript after this webinar, and we'll post further answers there. If you're listening to this after the fact as a recording, that's also a great place for you to ask a question. So feel free to reply to that post with any questions you have. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/AIP-recordings. If for some reason you don't have the rest of the series, you can find it at aka.ms/AIP-webinar. While you're there, please join our community by visiting aka.ms/security-community. That's the best way to ensure you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, requesting features, giving feedback, reviewing our product roadmaps, and attending in-person events or joining webinars like this. We believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. We have some very useful content for you today. This is part 2 in a 6-part webinar series on Azure Information Protection, or AIP for short. Throughout the series, we'll be walking you through all the major aspects of functionality, showing you how to deploy and configure each part. Today's focus will be on discovering data at rest. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter and AIP expert. Rafael Dominguez is a senior program manager on our AIP team and part of what we call our Get to Production group. He helps our customers deploy and configure AIP, so he has deep expertise in this topic. With that, I'll hand it over to him. Rafael.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Rafael Dominguez, again, a Senior Program Manager with the Azure Information Protection team, and I'm delighted that you can join us today. We're going to jump right into the agenda. We're going to talk about the discovery portion of the MIP story, the on-prem data discovery, as well as endpoint data discovery, followed by cloud and some sample reports and best practices. And we're going to end with a roadmap of AIP and what we're doing around discovery. So let's jump right in. No matter how much data you have in your organization, everyone has data that lives on-prem or in the cloud and third-party SaaS providers. In order for you to start protecting and understanding what you have, you need to discover and find out where that is. And that's where the Microsoft Information Protection story comes in to help you accelerate the discovery and protection of your data. This is a view on what the old days looked like, and that we had all our data safely secure within our four walls, and we knew what users were accessing and how and when. But all of that changed once you started moving to the cloud and implementing third-party SaaS applications like Office 365 and Box and Salesforce, etc. So data by its nature in the modern world wants and it's required at times to travel. So that means that a piece of document that gets created by a user in accounting or HR or marketing inevitably is going to find its way to a partner or someone else outside your organization. And that data mobility requires a different approach for us to get a handle on where that data resides, what is the sensitivity of that data, and how can we control it and report on where it is. To that effect, we have a framework that Microsoft Information Protection that we recommend that you start with. And we start by discovering that data and classify the sensitivity of the content of the data. We obviously want you to move along the axis here to applying protection once you found that data, and then do monitoring of that data. Today, we're focusing specifically on the discovery aspect. And so we're going to deep dive into that and hopefully give you some ideas of how you can, once again, have that full picture view and control of where your data resides, who's accessing it, and who's where it's gone and where it's been. Again, because the data is moving and it's exiting in your enterprise, we need a different approach. We have different tool sets from on-prem to the cloud. And so on premises, we have a technology we call the AIP scanner. That's using the same SDK and technology as AIP, Azure Information Protection, that will allow you to scan on-prem repositories. And we'll go into that a little later. On the client themselves, we have two technologies today that will allow you to discover data within them. That's AIP client and Windows Defender ATP. And for the cloud SaaS applications, we have our cloud app security technology. We won't be going deeper into the cloud app security in this webinar series, but those guys are having their own webinar series that I encourage you to watch at aka.ms/ncast webinar to learn more about the integration. So let's jump into the AIP scanner and that on-prem story. Today we have, again, a piece of technology that you can install on a Windows box on-prem that you can point to your file shares, NAS, any SIFS type repository, including SharePoint 2013 and 2016 that you have in your on-premises environment. And what that does is that allows you to go out in discovery mode and come back with a report with over 90 plus sensitivity types that we have out of the box. Things like US Social Security numbers, et cetera, that will tell you about the content of the files that live within those repositories. You optionally can do a labeling once you feel comfortable and what you have discovered on those repositories. And so we encourage you to start with a discovery to get visibility into what's available in on premises for you. So the reason we have this business technology is that we were hearing from customers that the impending GDPR rules that were coming in were going to impact them. They had no good handle on what data they had around the environment. And they also knew that they had a gap of finding out which users were accessing which data in those repositories, et cetera. So that's where we came into the market with the AIP scanner. And this is, again, a way for you to quickly find what you have on-prem for compliance purposes, or if you are in the process of migrating to the cloud. Before you migrate all those files, you want to understand the sensitivity that they have so that you can protect them accordingly once you put them on a cloud repository. You may also want to encrypt that data before we move to the cloud, so that having that visibility into the sensitivity of the files that you have on-prem, it's just a great place to start to make sure that you make that transition to the cloud in a more effective way. So here's some use cases that you can do with the scanner. I can discover sensitivity of the data that I have on-prem, find out where they are, right? The other one is I can do protection, implement encryption of the data by applying labels that have encryption underneath. So that's part of that MIP story that covers all the endpoints. Again, the cloud migration is another use case that we also discussed. Now, how do we configure this AIP scanner? So in the past, we had a bunch of PowerShell scripts that you had to run on-prem to set up the policies for the scanner and the profiles. We now move that to the cloud. And so when you go to the Azure AIP portal, you will have a scanner section there, as you can see on the screen. And within the profiles, this is where you can start creating the policies of what you discover, et cetera. And we'll go through some of that. So this is a view of a policy here. It basically shows you how you can configure the scanner. And initially, you want to do a manual kind of once discovery, and you want to set all the information types to all so that you can bring back just this wealth of information based on all the different sensitivity types that we have. For example, a few weeks ago, we added several sensitivity types around Azure passwords and connection strings and things like that for Azure databases that now will be discovered automatically by the scanner. Again, because the scanner is using the same policies and the same labels as AIP, there's no need for you to create additional labels or anything like that for the scanner. It's just going to use the same backend, the same policies and labels. But this is, again, a quick way for you to start just getting a handle on what you have in the environment. I create a policy. I say I want to discover all the sensitivity types that I have set up. You can create your custom one as well, and the scanner will also look at that. And again, it's going to go out through all the file types that you have on-prem that are supported by AIP. So from Office documents to PDF and images and text files, etc. Enforcement, it's turned on here, but that means go ahead and encrypt my files when you find it. If I discover a file that has a security number, maybe apply a confidential label to it. That's not something, again, that we start with. You want to start with the discovery. So in your initial discovery, you will want to turn that off to make sure that you just do a report of what's available. And another area here that you can do, another thing you can do is have a default label. And again, these are more advanced kind of scenarios once you're comfortable with the data with the repository and the data that exists. So for example, you have an HR file share, and you're very familiar with the use case there, you're familiar with the type of files that they create, and you want to make sure that all files that land on this file share have a particular label. That's where the default label will come handy, so that you can have the scanner running at an interval, and new files that get whether modified or added will get stamped with the label that you selected. So that's a very useful feature if you have a lot of on-prem repositories. You see the file extension types at the bottom there that we support, or that you want to include or exclude. You can play with that as well. If it's certain file types that you just don't care, you want to skip, that's something you can definitely do. These are the repositories. So this is where you tell to go and discover sensitivity files within this file repository, so file shares. And in this case, I also have a SharePoint site there that I will be scanning. So the scanner will go out and scan this repository for you. The discovery that we'll be talking about later, it comes very handy for this scenario, because as I discover where users are saving files as they create new documents, that gives me an indication that there may be file repositories that I'm not aware of that I need to go and cover with the scanner, as long as they are on-prem. Okay. Again, so we moved a lot of the functionality of managing the scanner from creating profiles and schedules to the cloud, but also the ability to go ahead and initiate a scan, for example. So that's something that that you can do right from the console on the cloud. You no longer have to fiddle around with PowerShell commands. This makes it very easy for you if you have a large environment that requires dozens and dozens of scanners. So, for example, at Microsoft, we had upwards of 200 scanners deployed around the world, just because of geography and size of files that we had on-prem. And so we had to scale that to that level. And eventually, once we got comfortable and migrated stuff to the cloud, right, we brought that down to just a few. And so that's where we are today. So this is just a good way for you to see at a glance the entire scanner deployment. Any errors, anything that's offline and or scanning, all the statuses will be here, and just gives you a good indication of how your environment is performing. And once the scanners start scanning the data, it will start reporting that into Azure Monitor in a log analytics workspace. And that's just a really convenient way for you to see, again, what it found in those repositories. So as you can see here, it shows you different file repositories that have been scanned. It shows you how many files there are labeled, any of them that are protected, and any files with different information types. So you see the list of information type at the top there, including EU phone numbers, US social security number, etc. So that's, again, the beginning of you taking control, again, of your data, no matter where it lives, by just simply going out and discovering this data with a scanner, and now having the ability to do reporting, things like, oh, I want to see all the files that have social security numbers in them. You can filter by that, and I'll show you some of that later. Actually, let me see if I'm able to just switch over here, and if I come back to the discovery in Azure Information Protection analytics portal here, this is where I can come in and say, I want to filter and just take a look at US social security number files, and that's going to now filter that down to 120. I can then click on that, and it will now just show me that view and all those files that have that sensitivity type that I'm interested in. So again, very, very powerful. If you think about GDPR, data subject requests, for example, we have really good tools today to give you that visibility for cloud applications like O365, Salesforce, and everything else with our MCAS, and even some DLP within O365 can give you this view. We have the same thing for Azure. But I think the big gap that we had to that point was, how do I find out on-prem where I have all my PIIs, where I have all my social security number, OEU phone number, what have you. If I get a data subject request, there's a lot of tools that we at Microsoft have and you have at your disposal that can give you that. But this is filling that gap of the on-prem world now, where I can go in and select, again, as I want to show you here, all the different sensitivity types that we have that you can basically discover and filter by to easily and quickly create those reports that are demanded of you. So go back to this slide here. Again, as I mentioned, we added recently the ability to discover sensitive passwords and connection string information for Azure. Again, this is just keeps on growing. We keep adding. So if you have your favorite types of sensitivity types that you don't see out of the box here, you can either try to create one yourself as a custom one, or definitely reach out to us, let us know what those are. We'll try to prioritize those based on demand. But this list, you can expect it to grow as we engage with customers in scenarios and working with the cloud. Our customers are demanding that we provide, just out of the box, the ability to find all the files where IT or developers are storing, for example, my connection string that all of a sudden has secret keys and maybe even passwords, usernames and password, right? That are just sitting around and clear text and text files or Word documents. So that's an easy way for you, again, to now go out and discover all of that information in one place, and then have policies and procedures to protect them, to make sure that those files are encrypted, protected if they were ever to leave your environment. This is the view that I show you on the live demo. Again, just showing you all that data, all those files that contain, in this case, all the Azure connection strings and stuff. So this is, again, a very, very powerful view and technology that you have at your disposal as an IT professional, and even compliance, right? Because now I need to show that I know what this data is, but also how I protect it. And if I don't know what it is, it's going to be hard for me to protect it. So this is why we feel that this approach of starting with discovery is so critical, because it just leads to having that view of where your data resides. So now we'll be talking about file shares. We're talking about SharePoint sites on-prem. Let's pivot a little bit here into the endpoint, and by that we mean Windows endpoints in particular today, and so we're going to go into that. So what we have here is two ways that we can discover data that's sitting on users' endpoints and Windows clients. One is the AIP client itself. We today will take note and track all the activity that the users are performing, including anytime a user creates a new document and they apply a label to it, if they change the label, etc. And that works again for 7, 8, Windows 7, 8, and 10, Office 2010, 13, and 16, or Pro Plus, as we like to call it. So that's the state of the business today. In preview, hopefully soon here in the next quarter or so, we're going to have the ability to give you even more visibility into what users are interacting with in terms of files. So think about if I have a document that has a label, if I open a document, I will know about it today. But if it doesn't, you won't know about it because AIP is not interacting with it. So what we are planning to do is give you, based on the content, give you that information as well. So if you open a file that has a bunch of US Social Security numbers, for example, even if the user didn't label it, even if you don't have mandatory labels assigned to the file, we now going to go and report on that activity so that you have that central location that says, hey, this user opens a bunch of files that have sensitive information. What do you want to do about it, right? You want to go and protect it the next time they open, etc. So that runs again. That requires the AIP client that we'll have. Now, the other side of that is that if you have files that just landed on that PC from anywhere, or that have been there for a while, and the user doesn't open it, AIP is not going to know about it. So we're investing a lot in with our sister organization, the Defender ATP organization, to be able to discover files that reside within the user's PC, the user desktop, to alert the administrators of the type of sensitivity that exists within those files. In the first wave of this, we just released with RS5, the ability to detect files that are labeled. So any labeled file that lands on that PC, whether came through email, USB, or the web, as long as it lands on that PC, the Windows Defender ATP tool will take note of that and will send it to the analytics view that I show you. So that's very powerful. But again, today is only labeled. So in the future, with the next release of Windows 10, it will be able to give you that information based on the sensitivity as well, which again just covers that gamut of end-to-end existing files the user interact with, as well as files that are not that the user is not interacting with. Again, the drawback there is you do need the latest version of Windows 10. Fortunately, that's not going to be available for Windows 7 and 8. At least there's no plan for it yet at this point, and so that's where that technology is going. But it's pretty powerful. It's going to be very useful. Again, the integration of AIP and Defender ATP, it's super simple. You can enable this by just flipping the switch on the ATP portal, as you can see on the screen here. So that's something that again, we very excited to see that this simple integration that just by switching this switcher on, you are now getting that discovered data from ATP to your analytics in Azure AIP. Now, from the client itself, we are that functionality of discovering access and additional interaction with files. That's in private preview right now. We expect that to be available to you and preview here in Q2, which is just a month or so away. So wait to hear more on that capability. This is just a discovery from a Defender ATP. It shows you that the endpoints have X number of labeled files, for example, and whether or not they are protected. And we're going to enhance that by providing you the content type in the future. So that, again, just helps you with the discovery in multiple ways. We have the AIP use case of it, where now I know of more data that resides on the user's endpoints, not just the file shares and the SharePoint on-prem, but also the user's endpoints. But also, if I need to get a priority on a machine that gets attacked, for example, I can now see that this machine has more data that is sensitive on it, and I can prioritize it. Discovery demo. This is kind of what I show you that already. What it looks like. This is what it looks like on the portal. So we're going to jump right through that. Now we talk about getting visibility into file shares, SharePoint on-prem, and also the endpoints. So that covers the on-premises piece of the discovery. We also have capabilities to, within the Microsoft Information Protection family, to discover data that it's in the cloud. And that by that, we mean Microsoft and third parties as well. So this is about, again, giving you visibility end to end. And to do that, we have our, again, our sister organization called Cloud App Security, that is a proxy that sits a Cloud App Security, which is a CASB that sits in front of your cloud interactions. And again, very simple to enable it. In this case, what we have here is the ability to discover not just files that are labeled by Azure AIP, but also if you received a file from another organization that has a label on it, you can choose to discover that as well, those labels, or you can choose not to. So it's up to you. We give you the option there. And something we recently released is the ability to inspect protected files. So as if you encrypt a file that's stored on a say Office 365 or another SaaS application, we'll be able to open that file and inspect the content through Cloud App Security. So this is just some samples of policies that you can set up to do DLP discovery, to allow you to set label, to allow you to prevent upload or download of files. So again, I encourage you to see the MCAS webinar series at aka.ms/MCAS webinar. That will give you more detail on the integration and how you can set up these policies. But the concept here is that if I want MCAS to go and discover my files, I also have the ability to go and apply AIP labels to those files, even if they exist, again, in a third-party solutions like Box, Salesforce, etc. Of course, within the Microsoft ecosystem, that works the same, but it's very powerful in that you can now cover not just Microsoft, but also third-party SaaS ecosystems. So again, go discover these files based on the content, apply a label based on the source or destination, apply a label on download or prevent a download if the file is not labeled correctly, or if you have a certain label that you don't want to end up in a different location, then within your organization, the MCAS can help you prevent that scenario. So here's a quick scenario of a confidential document that landed in Box as a policy. It gets detected almost immediately, and then it gets encrypted. So now I am being reassured that even though the file left my organization to a SaaS provider, again, we still have coverage, we still have visibility, and that's pretty powerful for IT organizations. Again, this is the policy, all the discovery that he did. And by the way, today we are in the process of integrating all this discovery data from MCAS to Azure Information Protection. So all the activity data that you saw, and I will show you in a bit here, are coming over the next couple of months or so to Azure Information Protection. So you now get much greater visibility into where your files are, how they got there, or who's opening it, whether they're protected or not, etc. So think about having all of that, how powerful that information becomes. And I'll show you some of the things you can do once you have all that information. So I'm going to show you a few sample queries and reports that you can do. Again, once you have that data stored in Log Analytics within Azure Monitor, you can now go do some really interesting reporting and even alerts. And to just remember that any query that you can do, you can turn it into an alert. So that means if I want to monitor a particular activity in a folder or a particular activity by a user on a different location of the world, I am able to set up those kinds of alerts now because I have a centralized location, the centralized logging. So here's a quick example of a report that I can generate now. So this is, I want to see all the labeled downgrades. That means a file was set to confidential and then someone went and made it public, for example. That's a downgrade of a sensitivity on a file. On it by itself, you know, once you see that's not a big deal. But if you get a situation where someone through a PowerShell command or just right-clicking or doing some other automation in a quick succession downgrades the label of you know, several dozen files, for example, and that's something they don't typically do. That's something you may want to know. And so this is about knowing the life cycle of your data, right? This is a quick way for you to run. And let me see if I can jump into my demo here. And there it is. So this is my log analytics. I can go to log analytics here. And again, all this information is coming from on-prem. It's coming from and maybe I'll go back a little bit before I do that. All the data that's coming here. In this case, in my demo, I only have two kinds of data. I have AIP scanner. It's coming from this folder. As you can see, I have 1,700 or so files that were discovered. So the data is coming here directly. I also have activity from usage. So as you can see here on the activity side, I have any downgrade and new labels that were applied, any upgrade of a label. So if I went from a public or general to a confidential, highly confidential, that activity is also tracked. That's happening for both documents and emails. And so as you can see here, I have this view of not just the file, but also have the folder and the location. So that allows me to see that there is a folder within this user's PC that I should be aware of and that may contain sensitive data. I have the email address, the activity of that action, or rather the name of that action, and also the device names and application that created that activity. So pretty powerful to see that here. And so if I switch over to log analytics, then I have this just wealth of information that I can now start creating some really interesting reports. So I have a few here that I created. So I'll try to show you some of those. Let me just go into this. So for example, I want to see files that have more than 50 credit cards, for example. That's a quick query that I can create. I want to monitor and see label downgrades that happen. And in this case, I need to increase the number of days for this filter. And again, it's pretty simple to create. I want to see all the label downgrades that happen on a particular folder. In this case, it's an HR folder that is within my SharePoint Online environment. Again, because we're tracking that activity, we know that where those files reside. We know the users, we know the location, i.e. in this case, Ireland. We get Japan down there. So this is a quick way for me to see interactions and create perhaps an alert that if I see more than X number of downgrades on a particular folder, I can trigger an action. In this case, it could be getting an email alert or just notifying someone via email or text messages. Those are capabilities that are within Azure Monitor that you can do today. So it's pretty powerful. And how do I know where this user is? That's not something that AIP gives you, but luckily it is something that you get from Azure AD. So as the users are signing in, that activity is maintained from Azure AD. And so I can join now data from AIP and signing activity from Azure AD and say, I want to go out and collect not just the activity from this particular folder and this type of activity, but I want to know where those users are located. And so now that integration into multiple logs becomes super powerful. And it's something that I'm particularly very passionate about, and I hope that you start using as well. What's another one that we can do here? This one would be, again, probably have to go back a little further here to say 3 days. This is all the changes that happen, in Brazil, for example. These are the downgrades that happen in Brazil as of 3 days ago. I can focus this very much by however long I want to go back. And so this is just a quick way for me to take a look at that. And let me see another one. I think I already showed you this. Downgrade the US, for example. This is another one that's a lot of fun. I want to see downgrades, for example, per user and per country. This is another example of a nice report that you can generate. Again, combining the data that AIP is collecting plus data that signing activity that Azure AD is already collecting, hooking that up and sending it to Azure Monitor Log Analytics Workspace. I now have this ability to see all this data. And again, that's just the beginning. We are enriching this ecosystem. If you look at here, signing logs, that's coming from Azure AD. So you can actually take, Azure Monitor is pretty powerful because you can actually take data from all the sources, a custom type of data, and create a workspace or send it to the same workspace within Azure Monitor. And you're now able to join all that data in very creative reports like this. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. If you have custom logs, like in this case, AIP becomes a custom log, you can integrate it into Azure Monitor, and now gives you this just incredible capability for reports. I'm going to switch back to my slide here. Just breeze through some of this. We are almost at the end here, but again, just a quick way to see activity of usage of this tool by country, by user, for example. It's very powerful. This is the one that I show you, where I can see activity on a critical folder, whether it's on-prem, whether it's in the cloud. It doesn't matter. We're gonna have that data as long as the users are interacting with it, and AIP is in the mix. And soon, again, CAS data will be here, so this is going to become even more powerful for you to see even more data, more interactions. So we're very excited, looking forward to showing you what's possible there, and even getting some of your favorites reports and that you can come up with. So keep us posted on that. So let's talk a little bit about roadmap and best practices. How do I start with all of this, right? As we mentioned, the framework that we established is to start by discovering your data. There's just no better way to start. Get the scanner deployed, start pointing that to your on-prem data repositories, and once you have that, gives you a good idea of the sensitivity of the data that you have. That will lead to a taxonomy, label taxonomy conversation, and then how to protect that data. So this, again, finding out all this abnormal behavior within data, that's once you have it all in one place, it's just going to give you that visibility and just patterns and that you didn't have before. All right. So on the AIP scanner, we have a great blog. One of my colleagues, Kevin, wrote that helps you how to deploy that. So we encourage you to check that out. And also in this link, we'll make the slides available as well. We'll have options for optimizing the performance of the scanner. Obviously, you're not going to want to have just one scanner deployed for your terabytes and terabytes of data. You want to scale that out a little bit with multiple scanners. Again, by default, we encourage you to set up to detect all the information types, sensitivity types. So that's a good way to just see what's out there, right? It's not user impacting. It's just going to give you, the administrator, a view into what's out there, and then you make decisions from there. The scanning can be done just a one-time discovery, and then once you're comfortable with a particular repository, that's where you turn on enforcement, if that's what you want to do. It's not a requirement. It's just a recommendation that if you're comfortable with the repository and the data type, please go ahead and switch enforcement so that any new files, any files that get updated will be protected. Another tip here, again, put the scanner close to the repo, the repository there. That means that the scanner is going to have the need to take each file, import it into its memory, and do the scanning. The file doesn't get cached on the server or anything like that, but it's the information about the file just gets stored into a SQL database so that it doesn't scan over and over when it hasn't changed. And so that means, yeah, so there'll be some data that goes back and forth. So you need to keep that in mind. So the network latency performance between the scanner and your repositories. Again, AP analytics, super powerful. Client discovery is going to help you give you that visibility into interactions. The discovery dashboard, again, gives you that nice view of how users are interacting with your labels and taxonomy, and also what interaction they're doing across on-prem and in the cloud by combining the data from AIP scanner, the client itself, Defender ATP, and very soon MCAS from a discovery perspective. MCAS, again, it's a super powerful technology. I encourage you to check out those guys' webinar series, and if you're not familiar, the power of having a label on a file that MCAS will understand and say, by the way, you cannot upload this file here because of the sensitivity type associated to it, or you're downloading a file that comes from a sensitive source, MCAS being able to also apply those labels on egress. It's super, super powerful. So encourage you to check that out as well. A bit of a roadmap here, some of the recent announcements that we've had around the scanner, the UI that just went GA, some configuration UI. Again, you saw, as I was showing you, that in preview, we expect to be GA here in the next quarter or so. We have some GDPR reporting, the sensitivity type that we added that will be coming to you and GA very soon. In inspection of protected files, again, that was something that was added. From a future perspective, that's going to lead us to, again, enhance discovery on the sensitivity types on Defender ATP, and scale out of the scanner to make it more performant, and also supporting a unified labeling client, which is a transition that we are now doing to the Security and Compliance Center in Office 365. We're also going to be supporting custom info types and dictionaries, and some recommendations. That's going to be also a very powerful option where as we discover data by usage or different from the different tools that we mentioned, you have some recommendation that says, hey, by the way, there are a bunch of sensitive files sitting in this repository that you're not scanning, that you're not protecting. You may want to pay attention to that. And so with that, I want to thank you all, and I want to pass it back to Ryan to see if there are any questions.
Great, thank you, Rafael. So we got a few questions here. One is, where would be a good place to see guidance on picking up the query language?
Yes, so that's a great question. That would be a very useful skill to put in your tool belt. So that is based on what we call the Custo query language. And if you look at Azure Monitor, just look up some Azure Monitor query language. We can also post some information about some links on the Q&A post this event. But yeah, it's called the Custo query language. And if you look at the Azure Monitor, it's the same exact technology. So definitely encourage you to learn a little bit about your querying into this technology.
Great. Is there a third-party app registration process? And if so, what's the complete list of third-party apps?
So probably need a little more context on what that means. Not sure what that's referring to.
Perhaps that could have been to MCAS when you were speaking about MCAS.
Okay, so yes, there is a list of third-party applications that MCAS will connect to. So they will connect natively with where supported. But if not, as long as the third-party application has an API that we can talk to, the MCAS will be able to interface with those SaaS providers. But I encourage you to look at the MCAS documentation online.
Perfect, thanks. Will there be some policy to classify files downloaded from a particular site with a specific label? For example, if there's a URL like confidentialapp.corp.net as a download source on a client, can you make it always apply a label of confidential?
Yeah, so the MCAS tool, again, and I don't know if we have anyone from the MCAS team in this call that can help us confirm, but MCAS, my understanding is through policy, you can indicate what actions to take. So I believe that's definitely a capability, but we'll need to speak to the MCAS folks on that.
Okay, great. So on the scanner, is it not necessary to apply labels on sensitivity types, I assume? Is it also able to apply other protection like blocking actions?
So scanner can be run in two modes. One is in discovery mode, which is just tell me what's out there, whether it's social security number, right, driver's license, blah, blah, blah. That's just discovering what the data is. So that's a good way to start. If you wanted to, you can say, I want to not just discover the data, but also apply a label to it. We can do that as well. That's called enforcement mode. Today, we don't have a way to apply blocking of any other sort. We are looking into extending that capability to provide additional controls that the scanner can impose on files. But today, the only supported scenarios are discovery and also applying a label to a file.
Okay, great. If the scanner was deployed prior to being added to the Azure portal, is there something that needs to be done to integrate it?
As long as you have the latest scanner, the one that ships with the latest Azure AP client, again, that has integrations. You're going to have to do an upgrade if you have a previous version.
Okay. Will the scanner configuration reside in the Azure Blades only, or will it also be configurable in the Security and/or Compliance Center?
Today, it's going to reside on the Azure portal. Obviously, we're making a transition to the Security Compliance Center, but I don't have any date or information on when that transition for the scanner itself will happen.
Okay. When would MCAS activities be pushed to AIP Analytics?
The expected time frame is in the next quarter or so Q2, Q3 time frame.
Okay, great. What about third-party apps implementing with the MIP SDK?
So we have a very rich ecosystem of partners today that have implemented the MIP SDK. So one of them is Adobe, for example. We just released a updated version of Adobe Reader and Acrobat support AIP. We are also talking to and working with other partners. We encourage you to keep an eye out for our announcements on that. We also had some announcements at Ignite and RSA, so I'll invite you to check out those announcements.
Okay, great. Where does the scanner database exist? Can we configure regular reports or queries like monthly? Is something responsible for maintaining the database over time?
Yeah, so that's a SQL database that you will need to install on a Windows box on premises, and that gets maintained by you, and you can follow standard SQL kind of maintenance recommendations there.
Okay, great. Currently applying AIP protection or encryption to files in a library will not integrate with SharePoint Online Search. Is better integration with SPO on the horizon where these files will be searchable?
Absolutely, we are definitely hard at work and trying to address that. However, keep in mind that the MCAS tool will be able to reason over encrypted data in SharePoint Online because it's acting again as a super user, and it has access to protected content. But native support, yes, that's something we're actively working on, but dates are TBD as of today.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned it earlier, but someone asked because they missed it. Which console can you enable Windows Defender ATP through?
Yes, you got to go to the Windows Defender ATP console, which is, I believe, securitycenter.windows.com.
Okay. How about scanning tenants completely cloud-based 365?
Scanning tenants. So AIP scanner only works for on-premise today. And so if you want to discover data in the cloud, that's where our MCAS solutions comes in.
Okay, great. Within a tenant, this user has some users on E3 and some on E5. Will their tags be created automatically across the board, considering that they have two different licenses, or will it only be automatic for E5 users?
Yes, so that's sort of a licensing type question. So if you're using automation, you do require an E5 license or AIP P2, as we call it. There's no reason why you couldn't have a Office 365 E3 with an AIP P2 license combined, but that gets outside of the discussion here today. But again, you do require AIP P2 license to apply automation, and so we recommend that you speak to your account team on that. Okay,
fantastic. We've only got about 1 minute left here, so with that remaining time, I'm going to just share a couple links here and remind people about joining us further. So I just posted a link to the recordings. Here's one to the rest of the webinar series if for some reason you don't have that. If we were unable to get to your question live during the webinar, and we will try to answer it on this site, aka.ms/AIP Q&A. If you're also listening to this as recording after the fact, you can ask a question there. And as always, please join our community where we announce these type of webinars and all other major developments relevant to the product. So thank you very much, Raphael. That was a fascinating presentation. Remember, this was only part 2 in a 6-part series. So we hope that you will join us for the rest of it, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Brian.